All right, we're going to title this Cladistics, and we're going to start with the definition. Cladogram. So the definition of a cladogram is a hypothesis about evolutionary relationships and it utilizes shared characteristics. So these characteristics that we're talking about are like hair, fins, vertebrae, scales. They're just basically traits that we can look to kind of figure out the evolutionary relationships between species. Okay, so just here's what one might look like. It's a really simple one. And on the ends of the branches are the species. So you got species A, B, and C. Here, where the branches connect, this would be what we call a shared, or no, is what we would call a common ancestor, or most recent common ancestor. And it's also the point of divergence. So usually it's at these nodes where something happened, right? Maybe there was a geographical separation that occurred right there. And then this group of individuals went off and evolved to be species B. This other group went off in a different geographical area and went on to evolve to be species B. So these nodes, the nodes are significant. So like we said, the ends of branches represent extant. So this is a new word, extant species, which basically just means currently existing. Extant is the opposite of extinct. So it's either extant or extinct. The reason that we know that A, B, and C are extant is because time on a cladogram, time moves forward or moves up. So this would be like present day would be at the top, right? Present day. And then this is the past down here. So as you move up the cladogram, you're moving forward in time. The joints, or those points of the little dots that we have here, those represent speciation events, points of divergence, where they break off and evolve into different species. And then you might see like tick marks. So if you see a tick mark like right here, or maybe here, those would be what they call a derived trait. And another word for derived would maybe be like a novel trait, or maybe you could call it an innovation, right? A new trait. Those are all ways of thinking about a derived trait. So, and like we said, you guys, the cladogram utilizes these characteristics. So these tick marks are going to be really essential for helping us piece together the tree. Okay, so if up and down is showing the progress of time, any side-to-side motion that you have on the tree represents morphological change. Okay, so let's draw some examples. I'll give you a second to get caught up here. So we had talked about yesterday, it might have been, or the day before, we had talked about this relationship between fish, ichthyosaurs, and dolphins, and how they all have a very similar body. They have like kind of a torpedo-shaped body with a dorsal fin. They have side fins as well. There is, however, a difference between fish and dolphins. Well, there's many differences, but I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but fish, their back, their tail, the way they propel themselves is by wiggling side to side, but a dolphin is up and down, right? And the reason for this is that dolphins are believed to be, I mean, we have, it's pretty much certain, but dolphins are mammals that were once a land dwelling mammal. And so, right, like when I swim in a pool, I swim much more like a dolphin than a fish. You're not going to see me like propelling myself like side to side through a pool. I mean, that would freak you out. You'd be like, Mr. Are you like you're part fish or something? No, I would look more like a dolphin because my body bends that way. It bends up and down because that's just the way I'm structured. And a dolphin is the same way. The dolphin used to be like me, a land-dwelling creature that does most of its bending like forward and back. Right? I don't do a whole lot of side-to-side bending. So those are differences, but we used this to talk about convergent evolution, which is the streamlined body, the dorsal fin, all of those things evolved independently. So we could put that right here. We could say fins evolved not once, not twice, but 3 times in this case. Right? It had to have, because we're dealing with 3 different families, I think is what you would call this. The fish, reptile, and mammal family. And so we also had all kinds of other evolutionary events going on, different speciations and things. But, there's a lot more on this tree. But what I'm trying to show you is that fins here evolved independently 3 different times. And then down here, we would have what we would call a very distant common ancestor, because, and I don't even know what that would be. What would be the most recent common ancestor to reptiles, mammals, and fish? Probably be a gnathosome. I'm trying to remember back to zoology class, and I think it might have been something like that. It's like kind of like a weird. It's like the precursor to fish. It was like kind of like an eel-looking thing. But anyway, question mark. Probably not, but maybe that's what my memory is telling me. But anyway, they have a very distant common ancestor. So fins are an example here, in this case, of an analogous trait. So this is another vocab word that I want you guys to remember. An analogous trait is the opposite of a homologous trait. I'm going to show you homologous trait in just a second. Fins are an example of an analogous trait that evolved 3 different times through what we call convergent evolution. The reason why we call it convergent evolution is because the body plans of these 3 species, the body plans converged. In other words, the body plans became more like each other. That's another way of saying converged. Okay, so let's contrast this now with a cladogram of, let's say, woolly mammoth and elephant. So this species is extinct, so I put an X on there, and notice that woolly mammoth does not reach all the way to current day time. It stops short. That's because it's extinct. But elephant still lives on. So if we were to put the following traits, I want you to think about this. Where would we put tusks on this tree? Where would we put wool on the tree? Where would we put trunks on the tree? Okay, so if you think about it, the derived trait in this instance, the quote unquote innovation, was wool. So I'm going to place wool right here because it's shared only by the woolly mammoth. Elephant does not have wool. Now, tusks and trunks must have evolved down here because elephants and woolly mammoth both have tusks and trunks. Okay, now we could have, I will admit, it is a possibility that tusks and trunks evolved 2 separate times independently, right? So we could have done it like this, where you have tusks and trunks evolving for woolly mammoth and tusks and trunks evolving here. But does anybody find that convincing? You'd be like, yeah, that's probably not what happened. And the reason that you think that, and by the way, your judgment is very right. You're very right in thinking that that's probably not the way that it happened, because of the concept of parsimony. So parsimony, or the most parsimonious tree, is the one with the least number of derived traits. So what you try to do is you try to build this tree to have the least number of innovations, because it's more likely divergent evolution is much more likely than convergent evolution. In other words, it's much more likely to have an organism get modified and become something new than it would be to evolve all those traits independently from each other. But it does happen. Convergent evolution happens. We see it all over the place. Do you guys know that a squid's eye, or an octopus's eye, octopus and squid have eyeballs, but those eyes are evolved separately from the eye that mammals have, and even fish. So fish eye, a cow eye, a bird eye, a reptile eye, and a human eye are all structured the same. If you analyze the physiology of it, the layers and the parts, they are homologous, which means that our eyes are derived from fish eyes. But if you analyze the physiology of an octopus eye or a squid eye, you find that it is structured differently. In fact, the retina is inverted. It's in a different location than the other eye. So that was our first clue that squid eye, human eye, is an example of convergent evolution. They evolved independently, which is kind of miraculous. It's kind of cool. So you have to, sometimes you got to look closely to figure out whether a trait is analogous or whether it's homologous. So homologous, we're going to talk, so a homologous trait would be like tusks and trunks are homologous traits. The reason why they're homologous is because they share the reason for their similarity is because of recent common ancestry. And that contrasts with analogous traits. Tusks and trunks are example of homologous traits because they evolved once, but then descended with modification. Remember that? The descent with modification? That was Darwin's language that he used to describe. This descent with modification is what is creating these differences between the woolly mammoth and the elephant. You got the woolly mammoth has descended from elephant or vice versa. I don't know actually, but it doesn't really matter. This is for the illustration. You get the point. We have the descent with modification. Another famous example of homologous traits is like the limbs of, say, a bat, a whale. So bats, whales, and humans. If you look at the limbs, so like a bat's wing and then a whale's flipper and a human's arm, they all have a humerus, radius and an ulna, carpals, and metacarpals. Every one of them has that same pattern of bones. It's just that they've been like the whale's humerus has been shortened and stiffened up. The whale's phalanges have been like extended, but all of the same sets of bones are in a whale's flipper, a bat's wing, and a human's arm. So this is the go-to example of homologous traits is those limbs and the patterns of bones, because it in a very powerful way illustrates this idea of descent with modification. What we're modifying is the length of those bones. The limb of a bat, whale, and human all have same set of bones. Did you guys know that if you look at a whale's skeletal system, the whale actually has a pelvis and then like a little hip, like a little shrunken hip bone? Snakes too. Snakes and whales have pelvises and ball and socket joints, and so that's it's a vestigial organ that is kind of stuck around over the years, but it is derived from its land dwelling ancestor that it evolved from, right? It still hangs around and it's in there. The other thing with whales too is that they, like, there was a time when people thought a whale was a fish. You know, like they were historically. You don't even have to go back that far in time. Maybe 400 or 500 years, and people would have referred to whales as fish. It's understandable. I mean, they didn't know. What we know now, though, is that a whale has whiskers. It nurses its young. It has a placenta. It has lungs, not gills. It has a vestigial hip bone. There's just all these clues that make it really obvious to us living in modern times, but it wasn't obvious before, right? There might be one other clue. Oh yeah, warm-blooded, right? Which is all the characteristics of mammals. Whales have it. And then whales too, instead of doing the side to side locomotion, they too are the up and down like dolphins. Any questions? All right, you guys. So here is the task.